I like the people, I like the history, I like the good memories I have. I grew up in Frankfurt. I lived in Frankfurt most of my life. We used to be able to walk Frankfurt Avenue and not be afraid. There were so many shops there. There was so much to look at. Um, People were friendly. Factories, you could hear the factories going in the background, especially textiles with the looms going and that noise of the clacking of those looms, and it would just put you to sleep because some of those factories worked like 24 hours a day. I think our textile industry is really important. The Victorian part of Frankfurt came out of that, where the mill owners lived. Leaper Street is full of the mill owners' home. In fact, our old Frankfurt Y was the first mill owners' home built in Frankfurt. And then the mill managers' homes are all on across from Overington Park on Orthodox Street, just between Oakland and Leaper Street. The textiles created jobs for everybody in Frankfurt. So you'll see the little houses where the workers lived, then you'll see the little bit bigger houses where the mill owners lived, and it was just full of activity. I think the L ruined it. The L makes it very dark. It's very noisy too. I think that the L bents that hold the structure up has to be cleaned or brightened up a bit. It's just all one color. I remember when I was vice president of the business association a couple of years back, there was an idea that came forward that each block be painted a different color, so that if you had a business, you could say, well, I'm on the blue block or I'm on the yellow block, and it would, when people came to Frankfurt and they were shopping in your shop. But that's when we had some stores where it was a destination. But that was one of the ideas that came forth with the business association. But SEPTA was very hard to deal with. We have a lot of factories still in Frankfurt, some of them vacant, some of them have been reused, which is good, but I'm not sure how much job creation is going on with these big buildings. I'd like to see some industry come back. We need industry back in the country anyway, so I'm not sure if that would be possible. Down by Wamrath Park, where Frankfurt and Kensington meet, Wamrath Park is a small portion of an estate that was once there. Henry and Elizabeth Drinker lived there back in the Revolutionary War time, and they were very good friends with Thomas Jefferson, and they were also very good friends with some of the delegates of the Continental Congress. It was said that the first 4th of July celebration was down there. Now you have the creek right down there, right by that park. People don't realize that now with all the buildings and all. But the first 4th of July celebration was held there by the signers of the Declaration of Independence that were in the city at the time. After they signed that document, they were coming up Frankfurt Avenue. It was the main route to get out of the city. And they stopped at the Drinker Estate. They dined there, and they had this celebration. So it's in a couple of Revolutionary War diners that this is where the signers dined the day they signed that document. It's a very important part of history. It's a small part of history people don't know. As is the Frankfurt Advice, where the Continental Congress met in Frankfurt and determined that they actually picked Thomas Jefferson to author that document because he was a Southerner. And there was a lot going on during that war. We not only had the slavery issue where we wanted to have the abolition, the slaves freed, but there was also the British. And I guess the British really preoccupied a lot of our founding fathers' time. So we had to get them out first. And then, of course, you know what follows with the abolition of slavery and all. There are so many churches in Frankfurt with different denominations. There was even a synagogue in Frankfurt. But I want to talk about the churches along the main strip, Frankfurt Avenue. And as you starting down in the southern end of Frankford, what we know as the Pink Church. It's the Presbyterian Church of Frankfurt. The Presbyterian Church of Frankfurt dates back prior to the Revolutionary War. The building we see now is not is not the original building. That building was designed by an architect, John MacArthur, who was the architect for our city hall. That basement of that church, it's the third church on the same site. The basement was used as a jail for the Hessian soldiers during the Revolutionary War. It was a German Calvinistic church then, so the people spoke German, so they were able to really relate to these Hessian soldiers. There's a story that goes on that I had read that these Hessian soldiers actually, because they were prisoners of war from the British side, they actually liked these people at the Pink Church, so they fought for our side. They switched over to the American side during the war. Going up the avenue on the opposite side of where the Pink Church is, there's a big gray church, St. Mark's Episcopal Church. And that church was noted for their Civil War effort. They have a wonderful plaque inside that church with all the names of the Civil War veterans who served from that church. And there was a James Ashworth who attended that church, and he came from England, and he was so for this Civil War that we had to fight this Union effort. He set up 2 recruiting stations along Frankford Avenue. So Frankfurt had the most recruits of any town its size in the nation due to that war effort and that gentleman from St. Mark's Church. Now I'm going to take you up the avenue, okay, that by Frankford and Harrison Street. There's another Presbyterian church, the Hermann Presbyterian Church. That church was built by Matthias Baldwin. Matthias Baldwin, he worked in Frankfurt originally as a jeweler, and then he had his own business, and his own business was designing locomotives. And he had a locomotive business. The Baldwin family also, part of his family owned Baldwin Dairies, which was in Frankfurt. But Matthias Baldwin bought the land, paid to have the church built, and it was his last act of philanthropy in his life. The manse of that church was built later on, but he even paid for the pastor's first year's salary. So that's the story of the churches along Frankford Avenue. I could go into the outside, but it would take so long. The architecture in Frankfurt always amazes me. We have a little bit of everything. Houses that date back to the 1700s, all the way up into the 1940s. The best way to look at Frankfurt is get off every L stop. And if you get off at the Church Street stop and you look from that platform east to west, you'll see the older part of Frankfurt. This part of Frankfurt is more colonial. As you go up Margaret Street, you start seeing changes. You start seeing Victorian houses built. And as you get off at Bridge Street and you stand on that platform and look down at Frankfurt, you can see the magnificent big Victorian homes. And that's what I like about Frankfurt, the eclectic mix of all this architecture. So there is something for everyone, from the little tiny houses for starter homes all the way up to the big giant Victorian homes. When I was younger, my girlfriend and I walked all over the place, all over Frankfurt, and we ventured into Northwood, which is kind of like the afterthought of Frankfurt. It was known as Mortgage Hill. They built these houses right around the Depression, and some of these houses sat until after the Depression was over. But we would walk through these neighborhoods, like in the neighborhood of Northwood, and it was like our voices really went down because, oh my goodness, all the rich people lived here. So we had such a good time walking through the neighborhood. But you could walk Frankfurt. It's very walkable. It's very accessible now, even with that L. I think that with the price of gas now, with the way the economy is, people should use public transportation more, and I do think that if they could find a way to make that transportation center feel safer, and even the L stops maybe more attractive, I think people would use that L. But I also think people need to move to Frankfurt to be around this, and you could probably get housing fairly reasonable now, and you can have your pick of a small house or a big Victorian. I think there's too many rental properties now in Frankfurt, and if we could just flip that a little bit and have, no, not totally do away with rentals, but I think more home ownership would make the neighborhood a little bit more attractive. There's so much to know about Frankfurt. Just when I think I've read almost everything about Frankfurt, I come across something that just blows me away. It has such a, it's so old, it has such a history, and I think that it just, the history not only has to be embraced, but we also have to embrace modern times too. So I think that whole thing could be meshed together somehow. You know, when you think about Frankfurt, we're already a green community. We have old houses. How green can you get? You don't have to use this new material to build houses. We have the houses here. We have open space, parks that are beautifully kept. So go green, live in Frankfurt. I was researching throughout the country what little houses, and Frankfurt has a lot of these little tiny houses, and it's amazing how people are, because a big house is so, it costs so much to heat and cool. These little houses are more economical, and you could go more green with these little houses. And there are these little houses now being built across the country and being advertised, and we already have them here in Frankfurt. IKEA should get a hold of these little, if we could somehow convince IKEA to redo some of the insides of these little homes to make them like very, where people could utilize the most space in a little house. Just visit IKEA, you'll see how they utilize all this space. If we could convince IKEA to come and do a modern home, an old house, a very old house, but do it modern on the inside just to bring people in, I think that would be a great idea. If I could sum up Frankfurt in one word, it would be its fabulous history. Frankfurt is history.